All right. Thank you guys so much for showing up to Hackfort 2021. My name's Sean Wakely. I'm the director of Hackfort. I hope you guys have been having a fun tree fort. It's so great to be back. Well, I'm actually a little excited about this panel. Mike and I had some, a little bit.
Tiny bit.
He's containing himself.
Mike and I, had some, we were just working on programming, and I was thinking about the pandemic, and I thought about Mike's girlfriend, Veronica, who's very involved in the theater scene here, works for Idaho Shakespeare Festival, and I was really curious about just what did the theater community do through the pandemic? How were they able to adapt? How did things change? So I had a great conversation, and I'm super thankful for you to bring everybody here, and I just hope you guys have fun. I mean, this can be pretty informal too. So, yeah. And we do have a mic for questions. I'm gonna give it to Mike Taylor, and Q&A whenever you guys want.
Yeah. Well, if you have any questions, feel free to ask at any time.
Come sit right here in the front row. Join us.
Join us.
Join us.
But
Join
be
us.
socially distanced. One of us. He's having a great time. Yay! So, thanks for coming out. I don't consider this a panel as much as a conversation with friends. So if you guys have any questions, feel free at any time. I don't care, just raise your hand and ask them for sure. So my name's Veronica Von Tobel. I'm the Director of Education at Idaho Shakespeare Festival, and I've been in that position for 5 years, but I've worked for ISF since 2008, so I can't do math. I had a theater major, so I can't do math, but hopefully somebody here at Hackfort can.
It's 93 years.
Great, thank you. So I've asked, when they asked me to do this panel, I was like, man, who would be good? And I felt like I wanted and then they said no, and then I was like, you know what? Clouch is probably available.
It's free.
Richard Clouch has some time on his hands. But what's great about these folks here is that they all had a different side of the pandemic and the performing arts. Chaz Gentry, who I'll have them give a little bio about themselves. But Chaz Gentry has the technical side. He does film and works with probably every performing arts company at this time.
Lighting designers are hard to come by.
Yeah. So I thought he would be a great person to talk about kind of his journey with the film industry and the theater and performing arts industry right now. Then we have Dakota Brown, who kind of does it all. He had to write during the pandemic, had a theater company during the pandemic, acting. Plus, he's full-time employee at ISF as well. So he has that side. And then we have Doctor. Would you prefer Dr. Richard Clouch? So then we have Richard Clouch, who is the chair of what's the new title?
The Department of Theater, Film, and Creative Writing.
Yeah. When I went to Boise State, it was just the Department of Theater. Was it? Yes, it was. So I think that Richard provides an education standpoint for the performing arts as well. So that's why I asked them to be here. So if we just want to go down the line and kind of say kind of your background and your journey in the performing arts in Boise, I guess.
So I was in the film program at Boise State before Richard started the new program. I remember actually walking into the Egyptian as you announced it on accident, and I was like, son of a bitch, they finally did it. And I was like, I'm leaving. But honestly, it was one of those things where I was starting in film, and I've been making movies for a long time. And I met Veronica, actually one of the first people I ever met in Boise, because we were making movies, and so we were kind of like scouting through the theater department to get people, and so that's how that came about. And then years later, I came back to Boise after being gone for a minute, and I was invited to do a theater show, and it was a red light variety show, and it was a burlesque, aerialist, sort of like vaudeville type show, and it's still going on. And I was like, people taking their clothes off, and I'm getting paid to light that? I'm gonna say yes to that. But I didn't know anything about theater, and so I basically somehow just accidentally fell into theater, and it became actually much more enjoyable as a creative force. And so I was able to take those skill sets from film and then kind of translate those over. And so then it kind of came to now where I've been mostly working in theater, because lighting designers are sort of hard to come by. I think I don't know that very many right now that are even working, but regardless, it's so, when the pandemic happened, I was like, oh, we want to make some movies instead? Because we're going to be off the stage for a while? Awesome, let's try it out. And I've been trying to, like, for years, get a lot of my peers to be like, hey, we should make a movie. You got a lot of skills, let's use those. You know how to build a set? You also know how to make a thing happen under $500? Awesome, let's get this done. And so...
And we always said no.
It's true.
Until we had to say yes.
I'm sorry, I can't get the accolades from my fans anymore. So, yes, I'll come act in your little film. Actually, in the end, though, Veronica asked me to come and do ITY's stuff.
Idaho Theater for Youth is a touring, it's a program that's part of ISF that's been touring every spring. It's been around for like 40 years. It's been around for a very long time, Idaho Theater for Youth. We send a touring show to schools all across Idaho. We reach about, that and our high school tour, we reach about 50,000 students every spring. And so when I was like, I don't know what to do, then I was like, hey, Chaz, you want to make a film?
Do you have a budget?
And I was like, yes.
Yes, then.
I have a grant. Yeah. So, and you've worked with your Boise Philharmonics?
So Boise Philharmonic had been wanting to do some stuff as well, and so I think what happened there is that they were like, well, we have this money, and we need to pay our, we still want to pay our musicians to work, so how can we do this in a way that's feasible for all of our musicians to still be able to make some sort of living? And so Tracy Sunderland, actually, in the end, was asked to come in and direct those things. And it's kind of interesting to think, a director for Philharmonic music? Okay, all right. And so it went from like big concepts to small concepts. So we kind of played with it because there was at least 23 different performances we did for the digital program. And we did a lot, but we all did them at the Morrison Center, and maybe a few things outside of that. Not very many, but a few. And so one of the things that came out of that was an interesting thing of them going, oh, we have the taste now for production design. I want more. It's like, I taste the blood, give me more. So this year we're doing a few more, despite some, well, now it's sort of been up in the air as things change, but like, I think they're gonna continue to do some digital programs and then also still keep production design in their live performances. So it's no longer just gonna be lights on with a shell, but maybe some elements of things to watch while the music's playing. So it's helped evolve Boise Phil's sort of idea of how performance works.
Yeah.
It's been pretty cool. And then I did also BCT's one-woman show
Boise
with Jodine.
Contemporary Theater.
Yes, Boise Contemporary Theater. And Jodine Revere has a one-woman show, I believe, that's playing in the spring. And we decided, well, a one-woman show is probably pretty easy, but not necessarily easy, but also at the same time, a feasible production that we could probably make within a level that we could do from a small crew standpoint, especially in that space. And so we decided to shoot her show. And then I think it's still in the editing stages, but they are probably going to premiere that, I think, in the spring as well. It'd be interesting to be able to compare the live show versus the production.
Yeah, the digital version.
Yeah, but the best part about that whole thing is like, even for ITY, it's like, now you have this thing that actually is like more than just an archival of your guys' work. It's actually something you can then take to people as a product and resell. It's an evergreen, really. And even Jodine's show is like, you can take that to a film festival, and those are viable movies. They're movies. Right. So, and you're storytellers, and so one of the things I love about it is like finally giving you guys a chance to actually, you know, express yourself in a way that while the beauty of theater is that it sometimes just disappears in a puff of air at the end of the day, and all those mistakes they made are forgotten for tomorrow.
That's the best part.
That's the best part. This also allows them for them to just sort of see like what that sort of looks like from the outside and critically look at their own work. So
Oh, gross.
yeah. Anyway, I didn't mean to talk too long.
No,
about
I
that.
love it. Yeah. And then Dakota, your journey in Boise, I guess.
Boy, yeah. So I am a West Coast transplant. I moved here about 10 years ago, and I'm sort of a living story of just what happens when you say yes to everything. As that's kind of how I was taught as a
Yes to various panels.
Exactly.
haven't
This
learned
is a good one. And so I got a degree in theater, and just the first thing I did in town was one of the outreach tours. It was the Shakespeareans tour with the Idaho Shakespeare Festival. They were touring Othello in 2009, and that's when we met. Veronica was on the Idaho Theater for Youth tour at that time. Aesop's Network, I believe, was it that one? Yeah.
Acting in that.
Yeah. And so essentially just by trying to get in contact, remain in contact, and build good and sustainable connections with local theater companies, I've wound up just wearing a ton of hats for a lot of different companies. So I've worked with the Shakespeare Festival, I've worked with Boise Contemporary Theater, Red Light Variety Show, boy, Alley Rep. A few years ago, some friends and I we, of course, love the Shakespeare Festival, but there also isn't really a venue for smaller classical theater companies, or hasn't been for a while. And so we were at, what was it? It used to be the Postmodern Brewery Grindburger over on the corner by BCT. It used to be Table Rock, and it's yeah, exactly. And so we were just having lunch with a friend and mentor of ours, Dwayne Blackholler, and just talking about, how do you just make stuff? Like what's the big thing? What do you need to do? And he was a great resource in terms of what's necessary is boldness. And so at during that lunch, we just walked up to one of the employees working there and we're like, hey, do you have anything going on in a couple of months? Can we put a Shakespeare show up here? And the guy was like, bro, yeah, totally. And that bro, yeah, totally allowed us to debut our first show as our company didn't even have a name at that time, but we put up the Tragedy of Julius Caesar in just like a bar space. And it was a blast. It was a hoot. Yeah, exactly. The perfect place for it. And that was the inaugural show for what is now the Boise Bard Players, which I'm co-founder and part owner of a small classical Shakespeare company that performs. We tour a lot. We've performed at the Bishop's House over by the Old Pen. We've performed for the Mountain Home Arts Council during their summer sort of extravaganza, which is funny because it's all country musicians and then Shakespeare show. yeah. Recently we closed A Midsummer Night's Dream, which toured quite a bit, and we're looking into beginning our new season. But yeah, so I've worked as an actor, a teacher, a playwright, a director briefly. Done a lot of devised work, done a lot of acting work, but it's been amazing. And just the thing about theater folks is they must be adaptable. They have to be adaptable. And so what with the big curveball of COVID, it was, okay, now can we adapt to that? Like, sure, we can adapt to a changing, like, playing space if we're putting on a show or whatever, but yeah, so we did a lot of learning.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then, Mr. Cloud, your journey in Boise.
My journey started a long time ago.
Yeah.
Many, many, many years. I think, Boise is definitely the place I've lived the longest in my life. But I came here many years ago to be an assistant professor at Boise State in the Department of Theater Arts. And I've been there ever since. And obviously since that time, and I certainly hope I don't offend any Boise natives, in '92, Boise was still kind of struck me as a one-horse town. I mean, we were coming from Michigan. Boise State at that time was still a pretty small school. I think it had a total of 13,000 students, and there were 35, I remember this, 35 theater majors my first year here, 92, 93. But my family and I were sort of wondering, well, it's kind of a fun job, and they got this Shakespeare Festival, but what are we doing in Idaho again? And I'll tell you, since we got here, I've never looked back, man, and could not be happier that we stayed here in Boise and we've seen what's happened to this community and to the university. So yeah, I then became chair of our Department of Theater Arts, and then a few years ago we had an opportunity to merge with the graduate creative writing program at Boise State. And a few of us, myself and our interim dean at that time, sort of said, well, if we're going to have a department with theater and with creative writing, it only makes sense, doesn't it, to have a film program in there as well, so that we can focus more on narrative arts, if you will. Although the poets, I always make sure that the poetry part of creative writing, I always say narrative arts and language arts, right? Literary arts. And the university said, okay. So we joined some faculty members from the communication department who had their degrees and were much more interested in narrative film. And we joined with the creative writing program. We started 5 new undergraduate degrees, 2 in film and television arts, and 3 in creative writing. And we started in the fall of 2017 with the promise to our dean that within 3 years we would have 50 more majors in the department. And I'm very pleased to say that this semester we have over 200 more majors in the department. So we're close to 300 majors altogether. The majority of folks are in film. We have 117 majors in the film program, between 2 undergraduate degrees, a BA degree and a BFA degree. And we also have a very unique program in creative writing, which is called a Narrative Arts BFA. And the Narrative Arts BFA allows creative writing majors to study their emphasis of interest, whether it's poetry or fiction, or creative nonfiction, but we have to make some adjustments for that, only because we don't have a full-time faculty member in it right now. But the narrative arts degree also asks those majors to study playwriting, screenwriting, and to take production courses in both theater and film, so that they, I mean, the hope is that they expand their tools in the toolkit for being a professional writer. And it's the same thing in theater. And I you know, we're going to talk about, I know what COVID has done technology-wise, but I think one of the biggest things, and not that COVID did this, I realize it's been going on a long time, but I certainly know now, as I'm getting ready to retire in a few years,
God.
for my former students here, that we can't train people just to work in theater anymore. I think we do them a disservice. I think we do students a disservice. I don't think that anymore, the way things are moving in the 21st century, in the entertainment arts, whether it's theater, film, dance, events, event planning, which is becoming a huge career today, and we have just begun looking at that as a potential added certificate or degree program for us, which is event planning. Is that you want to work in theater, you better be ready to work in film, you better be ready to work in television. It doesn't matter what you do. If you're lighting, if you're sound, if you're an actor, and certainly if you're a writer and a director, you have to be able to cross over in order to make a living. I add a little bit of income every year as voiceovers. I do a standard voiceover every month. I won't tell you what company it's for because I won't tell you.
I'll tell
But it's
you.
a
I
big
know.
worldwide global conglomerate sort of deal. But hey, you know, I do voiceovers for them. But, and you guys know this, doing commercial work and whatever it takes to put food on your table and to pay the rent or to pay the mortgage. But today, I think we can't just train students to work in theater like we did when I was in school many, many, many years ago. And probably when you were in starting out too. We used to look at film disdainfully, you know, thinking that's not theater, that's film. But man, if you got a
thought the same
national
of you guys,
commercial,
don't worry.
you know, suddenly everything was very cool. So I just say, you know, that this is also something that helped us this last year, because in the fall of 19, we were totally shut down. The university was shut down. Everything was shut down, of course. Everything was shut down. But man, if you have a theater program or a film program and students can't come in and work, you know, what are they going to do? So we were able to join forces, and we joined our film program and theater programs got together. We had a faculty member, some people may recognize, a guy named Gordon Reinhardt, fabulous colleague director, who was working on his own adaptation of A Christmas Carol. And we said, why don't we produce Christmas Carol, but not as a stage play, because obviously we can't have audiences, but let's do it as a film project. And we'll bring the film program in, bring the students into the Peterson Theater, our black box theater, and because Gordon is writing the adaptation, we don't have to worry about streaming rights and royalties and everything else. And we did, and members of our faculty, both in theater and film, and students from both programs worked a number of weeks, very, very hard, to complete a version of Christmas Carol on film that will be ready for streaming by this December. It's still, parts of it are still in post right now. But it's hard because we had to go through many, many processes of approval with the university. Had to have, we looked at CDC guidelines, the state guidelines, State Board of Education, and then you look at IATSE guidelines, Actors Equity guidelines, Screen Actors Guild guidelines, and putting all of that together. So we had safety zones when we shot. Only certain people could be in those zones. Every actor had their own plastic bag or great big plastic container with their stuff. And they used to yell at us all the time about never touching someone else's prop backstage, so I used to always do it just to get stage managers upset.
You're notorious. People still talk about you and like if there was any sort of weaponry backstage.
Oh, weaponry. Oh, I can use that sword. Anyway, that was much enforced during this project. And it was great, but actors had to act alone, right? Because they had to act individually on camera. And then, of course, the film students would edit everything together to make it look seamless. That's the process that's taking place right now. And I don't think we've done as exhausting a project. We had faculty members coming in saying, I can't do that again, which I understood. So I think as we're talking about changes that the pandemic is bringing to entertainment, and as we'll continue to talk about that, I just also want to say that, and it's not just entertainment, it's obviously every industry, just about every business. What often gets overlooked is just the toll that it takes on people. The extra work, the extra care, the having to go the extra mile with everything, the having to take the time out of an afternoon to go get tested because you know that you've just maybe been exposed over here to something and something else, and just the stress and the strain from all of that. So that's what I add. That's, I guess, a part of my journey and part of where I am.
Yeah. No, I think you brought up a lot of good points about, first I want to talk about big projects. So Christmas Carol was a huge project for Boise State, and following all those guidelines, because it was before vaccines, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, fall of 20.
Yeah, so it was,
right?
yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So I want to talk about a big project, and I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on, we did our Idaho Theater for Youth tour virtually, and we filmed in person before any of us could be vaccinated, and so that was a struggle. But so Dakota, if you want to talk about maybe about the writing, because Dakota and I co-wrote with Chad Ethan Shohet a piece for children to be filmed. So
yeah, definitely. So we wrote an adaptation of The Wonderful Wizard of Oz entitled The Disbelievable Domain of Z. And so I think a major part of that was we wanted to come at it from the angle of understanding what our audience had been through for all of these months. A lot of them were students, and they had been just staring at screens. And we're like, okay, it is a big ask to ask them to stare at a screen again. But how can we engage with them with a spirit of compassion and understanding where they have been and where they're coming from, right? And so we had many a conversation early on that it was going to be the difference between, like, we wanted to have some Zoom portion in the film, I'm going to call it a film in the film. But we also wanted to break that, right? Like it's like narratively, it's a nice idea to establish a convention and then break it because that's fun, right? That's fun and engaging.
Well, and it's crazy because what you brought up about rights with, that was a huge conversation because we were like, well, what's free domain where we could write and film it and stream it? Like, and that's something you don't have to think about.
No, and that's still very much an issue, trying to get the rights to a play, but then also potential streaming rights.
Right. It's still not,
Yeah, exactly. And so, we wanted to pick something that was public domain but still recognizable. So we're like, okay, so what is everyone probably seen, or what can we at least assume that some of our audience has seen? And it was Wizard of Oz, and are probably more familiar with the film than the book. And so our adaptation, in large part, just took things from the book itself. And so it was 3 students that were in a Zoom side room and then our tornado was kind of like an electrical storm thing that happened that transported them all to this new place. And it was essentially like inside of a video game. Yeah.
Well, and we had to choose. So we had to. Okay, I was like, okay, we can film in our warehouse where we build our sets at ISF. Is where we filmed it.
It's the production shop off of Warm
It's a production
Springs.
shop, so it just looks like a warehouse. And so I was like, okay, they get transported into a warehouse because that's where we can film.
Yeah, exactly. So we had these constraints, right? And like art constraints are great for art. They can be challenging, of course, but they also can force us to be more creative. And so we had to figure out how we build this narrative into all one location, and how can we make it look like a bunch of different spots, and how can we sort of still have our audience go with us on an adventure. And Veronica was instrumental in making sure that there was an interactive component in this film. And so when we sent out a study guide, it came with all of these different moments where teachers could pause and we could and have their students do an activity. And so these activities were all related to what the characters were going through.
Yeah, we had like a dance battle where we put like arrows.
Like a Dance Revolution style
Chaz
dance
had
battle.
to meticulously put arrows in the edit.
The amount of hours.
Staring at arrows so the kids could dance along with the
Yeah.
monsters.
Yeah, and we had a professional. I mean, what would you call Katie Pinozzo?
Oh, she's totally a choreographer. And
Yeah.
dancer
Oh, yeah.
Professionally.
Yeah. And so and it was nice to be able to loop in other folks whose work also may have been affected, and to be able to work with them. And so and I think that was really just our focus, is trying to make sure that even in this story, in this film, kids didn't feel like, okay, here's the same thing. Here's the same pandering stuff. So we also wanted to make sure that our characters were affected by COVID as well. And that's that. I'm gonna get real for a second. So
do.
I think one of the big issues, one of the big existential concerns especially with kids, it's big. What's going on is really intense, and we wanted to speak to how intense that was and make sure that we weren't just presenting something that was all sunshine and rainbows and kind of negating their experience, if that makes sense. We wanted them to understand, we know what you're going through, and here's something that'll hopefully brighten the day. And so, those are just kind of the targets that we wanted to hit through the writing process. That's cool. That's really
Yeah. Well, and what was cool about it too, I will. Yeah. We got to reach a bunch of different, communities that we wouldn't have necessarily gotten to reach without the video process, I guess. And you,
Oh, no. Go on.
Oh, okay.
Go on.
Thank you.
I'm gonna jump in here.
Yeah.
It seemed like a joke, but I'm actually
yeah,
going to continue. So part of the filming process, which I imagine we're going to get into, but our company manager at the time at the Shakespeare Festival had experience working with Ballet Idaho. So she had a mind for watching dancer tracks, which ended up being a translatable skill, because while we were filming in the warehouse, of course, there wasn't much airflow, which is tough already when people are,
and it was February, so we
Yes.
couldn't just open a door.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So we had to have someone keep in mind or have an eye out for all of our blocking, all of our movement in the frame, to make sure that we didn't pass through anyone's airflow, that if a prop got handed over, it would have to happen in a cut while we would Lysol a book or whatever we were handing off and wait for 30 seconds and then do the next take. And so it was all done with a lot of grace and responsibility.
We couldn't follow each other through a doorway, you know.
And
The
we wrote
bane
in
of
a
my
lot of
existence.
So
by the
Chaz
way.
can talk more about the COVID restrictions on that filming process.
So like a large thing that they would do as part of their their instrument of travel was walk through a door, all 4 of them at the same time. And which would always seem like not a big issue at all, and a wonderful problem solver for traveling in a typical theater sense, or even in just in a normal film sense. All of a sudden, while they were like, oh yeah, we can't actually go through the same door together. So it was a lot of me trying to find ways to be like, okay, so if you stand just a little bit upstage, back further from the door, you can go behind it, and I'll pan off the frame as you're going through it. So the next cut will eventually come in, and we'll pan on, and it'll look like you guys just walked through the door together. And that trick had to be figured out in new, unique ways at least 4 or 5 different times. And I think that was the bane of my editing existence.
Which I think is
said to the writer, come up with another
I know, right?
I said that definitely.
We were all in the room.
We were all there.
How dare you guys?
And we're like, yeah, man, that's a big problem. Sorry, Chaz. But I think that that's an interesting, kind of metaphor for, I think, most performing arts experiences, which is like, we now have this problem, and we have to figure out what to do. And I think for me, it was learning a bunch of new stuff that I didn't know, especially with technology. Like, I have no clue. So, like, film, I came to Chaz, and I was like, I want to do this thing. What do I do? What do I...
Well, I mean, when Veronica brought this up to me, it was still in the writing process, and I think that you guys were slowly getting through it, and I didn't want to get into it too much until you guys were at least at the first draft. And once you guys got because I didn't think the door problem was going to be an issue either, one that we actually got there. But also, Julie Bean, our company manager, was probably not aware of all the things that we had to do in restrictions when it happened, so nobody could foresee those things happening. And thankfully, we all worked together so we wouldn't on a long-term scale for many different mediums. So we knew how to sort of collaborate and work with each other. It wasn't one person's problem; it was everybody's. And so it was easy for us to go, okay, what we can do. And the thing, Richard, you say theater people just need to evolve and move forward and learn more about film. There is truth in that. I would work with these guys, and they would be a little afraid of film sometimes. Dakota and Richard even V.
I'm terrified.
But you guys have worked commercials before. It's not your first go-around with film completely. No, you haven't ever done. But I know Dakota had done a few things, and so had Richard. So it's it wasn't completely foreign, but at the same time, it's still very scary for some theater folk to go, okay, how do we get through this? And
not to interrupt you, Chaz, just a great point.
Right.
We had a number of students, theater students, who were very nervous about working on film. And even some of the film students were a little nervous filming theater students.
Right.
And
they don't know how to. I think the biggest thing I was going to say was that I think film people could really benefit from theater. And so one of the things that happened
vice versa.
100%. But I was saying theater has a really beautiful, unique way of being in the room together and solving problems often. Maybe specifically more on the smaller scale often. But there is a sort of work togetherness that film does have, but not on the long form that theater does, because you guys are together with at least sometimes a month's worth of rehearsal before you're even on that stage. And that includes your scenic designers and your sound designers. And film has a tendency to work on the set, but not beforehand. That's not the entire case for all productions, but on the smaller scale, we tend to think about the design, funny enough, last on our projects. Whereas in theater, everything is in the design and the performance. That's how it carries its story. And what makes this scenario really awesome was that when we got there, the only thing that you guys were missing was the frame lines, really. When you were saying, well, how do we deal with this? I'm like, well, we'll just pan off the screen.
brilliant.
But just like those little editing tricks that filmmakers use, right? But I learned so much on the creative scale of how to minimalize scenic design to create an element that we could use. Because when we were talking about how do we have this budget and we have these scenic designers and builders, how do we make these 3 or 4 sequences work as entirely different spaces? And on film, it's really hard to make one room look like a million different rooms. But in theater,
You did it, though.
but in theater, we learn those minimalist scales to say this element will describe this world, this element will do this. And film doesn't often utilize that, on that kind of level.
I just have to give mad props for we wrote in a sequence where all of the characters get attacked by hordes of flying monkeys, and I would love for you to talk about how you solved that problem that we presented to you.
I think what really was going on, so like a lot of the rooms, we would just use different scenic elements, color, to really kind of describe things. And one of the things is there was this room at the very end with the flying monkeys. And we were like, do we build? Because we have some people that know how to really build some puppets and give us some really interesting, beautiful scenic puppet design that we could have used. And we were like, well, that's probably about $4,000, $5,000 more worth. So I was like, well, in film. And even though I think theater has done these type of things too, always, absolutely, I'm sure that we can think countless ideas. It's like, let's just use shadows and light design to essentially create this. And I will create a soundscape of screaming monkeys flying above that will essentially create that. And so we had our production company manager and you guys and whoever was not on the screen at that time on a ladder just sort of going, okay, and now the feathers. And they would just feather the whole area. And then there'll be a shadow making thing kind of going by. And just those really simple $3 tricks that I was loving.
Brilliant acting.
It was amazing.
Really brilliant.
You were pulling from something deep inside.
Thank you. So I think we're at time for maybe questions. Does anybody have any questions? Right. Yeah.
Hello.
Hi.
I'm wondering how you think theater is going to change moving forward when things are back normal after everybody's had to learn a bunch of new stuff.
I think that's a great question. Richard.
Thanks, Veronica. It's a great question. I have no idea. That's my answer. I don't know. I think it'll come back with a force when it finally does come back, and we get past you have to have vaccinated audiences and and so forth. Once we get past the pandemic, which will happen, it will happen. I just don't know when. I think it'll come back like a storm. I think the people's pent up passions and desires to both create theater and to attend theater will be back in full force. Same with music and dance, all of the performing arts, opera, of course, orchestras, and so forth. Content will change. And I think I think content will change in our theater work for years to come. And I don't mean to scare anybody and say, well, all the plays for the next 20 years are all going to be about COVID. I don't. Oh God, another COVID play? Jesus! I don't think that's
COVID, the musical.
exactly.
It's already been written.
That's
know
what's that's what's going to happen. We're doing SpongeBob next spring. I think
Of course
SpongeBob's
you
a
are.
musical. Yes, COVID the musical. But I think it's going to affect our writing, just like 9/11 did to a great extent for several years, and still does today in our culture, affect certain writers. But I also think that, and I hope but I do think that theater artists will be more bold and they'll be more adventurous, because we've seen the other side. At least our generation. I mean, not our generations that are alive right now, all of us, right? Our generations right now have seen the worst of it, because we've seen everything taken away from us. And our not being able to do what we love to do so much for a long time. And we've had to do other things, other jobs and everything, just to survive, just to get back. So I think that it will, and I hope that it will, become a much more adventurous, exciting, unrealized art form. It's different, more radical, and more exciting than anything we've seen before.
I was just going to bring up one of the things that happened that was probably the most positive aspect of a pandemic, which is an interesting thing to say, is the time to. Oh. But like, I haven't had a chance to sit down and like listen to my own thoughts for years, because as theater runs, and we were running at full power before all this all happened, I was probably averaging 12 shows a year. I'm like, I was getting tired. And like, I know that was the case for you guys as well. And so like, for the first time in a long time, when you stop doing the thing that you sometimes identify with completely and wholly, you have to realize sometimes there's other parts of you that you have to look at. And so for us, it's been interesting and this is one of the things I think IATSE's going through right now, is like going, okay, we are coming back. We've been working super hard during this pandemic as trying to keep the industry alive, and with all these restrictions, it even makes it more difficult to actually, like you're talking about trying to get cleared for COVID often during a daily shoot. I mean, like, I have friends that are like, I'm in the green zone, I'm in the orange zone, I'm in the yellow zone, I can be here, there, and there. But like, that takes more hours out of your day to do that job that was already hard. And so I think the best thing in a lot of ways is that as we move forward through theater, we're going to try to take care of ourselves, I think, a little bit more, too. As much as it will be a force to be reckoned with, there's going to be a lot of us that are going to be like, okay, how can I still do this amount of work better, but probably less intense on my body and my psyche? And I cannot wait to see how that kind of works out for some of us.
Yeah. I guess a quick footnote, kind of touching on both subjects. It's and this has happened kind of across several industries, but part of what the pandemic has kind of done is either shaken or knocked down all of these established hierarchies. And we sort of have an understanding of how the world is supposed to work, or how we think the world works. And now that there's been this examination of, okay, what do we really need and what's really necessary, I think in both cases, I hope that as performing artists, we learn to take care of ourselves in more responsible and more holistic ways. And additionally, we do become bolder and braver. I think again, here's a hope, but I think you'll start seeing more things like Sleep No More site-specific work, more interesting work. Like, we know that we don't need the space to make the art. And that's something that a lot of my friends in performance, and some folks in like the stand-up comedy community, people are doing shows where it'll be in the back of their pickup truck, and they'll drive up to your yard, and you assemble the audience, and they'll do a show in your driveway. And so people have had to become more creative in that way, and so I'm hoping that feeds its way into our work as well.
It reminds me, you touch on something I hold very dear, the great British director Peter Brook, who said two of the most amazing things. He said one thing I still tell people today. His quote is, you hang on tightly but let go lightly. And I don't think anything describes our experience in the theater more than that, as well as other things in life too, right? But the other thing is, Brooke is the one who said back in the 50s, he said, all you need to do theater is an empty space. Just an empty space. Anywhere. Yep. And I agree with you, Dakota, and I think it's a great reminder to us of, we're moving forward into this new unknown world, brave new world. Yeah. But at the same time, we reflect back on what the other greats have said in the past and what they realized. Mm-hmm.
I was watching IDT do a dance piece in LED, and it was during the day with no production, like in elements and stuff like that. And I was just sitting there, and I hadn't seen pure dance in such a long time that I actually started tearing up. And I'm like going, I'm hiding behind my mask. I'm like going, nobody can see this. but like Bard's Company does that right now. You guys can prove that, the empty room and just a few people, a very small amount of elements can make a full production come to life. And when I saw Midsummers, it was one of the best things I'd seen in a long time, and one of the simplest things at that same time. I mean, the ideas are complex on how you guys promote those things, but the technology wasn't really there, and it worked beautifully for that. And I want to see more of that too. I think we don't need to have me to be a part of that scene to make that work.
But it's nice when you're there.
But yeah.
But we want you, Chad.
I think we have maybe time for another question if anybody has a question. If not, we can wrap this up.
And I can say we had more people in this one than the panel right before us.
Richard's
Yes!
very
We feel
competitive.
good.
He's very competitive.
Thanks, everybody.
Well, thank
Thank
you
you
to
for
my
coming out.
panelists. They're amazing. Thank you guys for coming. Thanks. Thanks,
Thank you.
Hackfort.
Thank you, everyone, for coming. Yeah.